During World War II, the Soviet Union did something so extreme it baffled even its own soldiers. They sank their own tanks, not out of madness, but out of strategy and survival. When the German invasion came roaring across the Eastern Front in 1941, the Soviet army faced a brutal choice: let their weapons fall into enemy hands, or destroy them themselves. What followed became one of the most desperate and disciplined tactics of the entire war. A grim chapter in what history calls the Scorched-Earth Policy. When Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, more than 3 million German soldiers surged across the Soviet border. The Red Army, still recovering from purges and poor coordination, was forced into retreat after retreat. Every mile lost meant another Soviet town, another depot, another machine captured by the Germans. So, from the highest ranks in Moscow came an unforgiving order: if it cannot be moved, destroy it. That single line reshaped the landscape of war. Factories were burned, bridges blown apart, crops torched, and yes, tanks sunk beneath the water. The purpose was simple: deny the enemy everything. If the Germans couldn't use Soviet resources, their momentum would slow. It was destruction not for defeat, but to buy time. For soldiers on the ground, this command wasn't just a policy. It was a nightmare made real. Imagine being a Soviet tank crew retreating from a relentless German advance. Your T-34's engine coughs, sputters, and dies in the mud. You look at the horizon, the dust of panzers rising in the distance. There's no way to tow it, no time to repair. So, the order takes hold. You open the hatches, set charges, or, if you're near water, roll your machine into a river and watch it disappear beneath the surface. That tank had been your home, your shield, your lifeline. Now, it was a weapon denied to the enemy. But destruction wasn't always the end. Sometimes, the Soviets used water not to destroy, but to hide. Nazi bombers constantly patrolled the skies, searching for tank columns crossing bridges or open terrain. A glint of metal could mean instant death from above. So, Soviet engineers and tank crews came up with a daring idea: submerge the tanks. Crews would drive along the riverbed, completely underwater, a crude pipe extending from the hatch to the surface so they could breathe. To the German pilots scanning the landscape, the rivers looked calm and empty. But beneath those waters, Soviet steel beasts crawled silently forward, invisible to the sky. It was incredibly risky. The water pressure could crush the hull, the engines could flood, and a single mistake meant the crew drowned. But for soldiers with no air cover and no bridges left standing, it was a chance worth taking. The decision to destroy or sink tanks wasn't always strategic. Sometimes it was inevitable. In the early years of the war, mechanical failure was the Red Army's second enemy. Rapid wartime production had flooded the front with new tanks, T-26, BT-7s, and the now legendary T-34. But the rush to arm millions meant quality suffered. Engines overheated, transmissions jammed, fuel systems leaked, and logistics practically non-existent. Factories churned out tanks faster than they could ship spare parts. A broken vehicle deep behind the front lines had no hope of recovery. In the chaos of retreat, a tank that stalled was doomed. Crews couldn't risk leaving it intact. The Germans were famous for salvaging captured armor, turning it into what they called Beutepanzer, trophy tanks. So if it broke, the crew broke it further, by fire, by explosion, or by water. By the summer of 1941, entire Soviet divisions were being encircled. In just a few months, the Red Army lost over 20,500 tanks, a staggering number unmatched by any other army in history. But not all those losses came from combat. Thousands were abandoned, destroyed by their own crews, or left submerged in rivers, buried in marshes, or scattered across the retreat routes. To the Germans, these wrecks were trophies. To the Soviets, they were sacrifices. Every tank denied to the Wehrmacht meant one less enemy gun on the next battlefield. Every burned machine bought time for new factories in the East to produce replacements. This was the Soviet logic of survival. Better to destroy your own weapon than to let it turn against you. Desperation also inspired creativity. When retreating through open country, Soviet crews faced constant risk from Luftwaffe aircraft. Even a single bridge crossing could become a death trap under German air patrols. By submerging tanks in rivers, the Soviets created temporary steel ghosts. With only the snorkel pipe showing, these tanks could wait underwater for hours until the bombers passed overhead. Once the skies cleared, they'd crawl back onto land, water pouring from their hatches, battered, soaked, but alive. This strange tactic blurred the line between retreat and resilience, a sign that even under pressure, the Red Army refused to stop fighting. Behind these tactical decisions was a nation stretched to its limits. Cities burned, rail lines crumbled, communication failed. And yet, amid the wreckage, Soviet commanders enforced the scorched earth rule without hesitation. Entire fuel depots were detonated to keep the Germans from refueling. Factories in Ukraine and Belarus were stripped bare before being blown apart. What couldn't be moved east was destroyed on the spot, tanks included. It was a war not only of soldiers, but of resources, of logistics, and of time. Every destroyed tank was both a loss and a delay, one more obstacle for the Germans racing toward Moscow. What began as chaos soon hardened into doctrine. Soviet leaders realized that denying the enemy resources could be as powerful as defeating them outright. By winter 1941, this philosophy helped stall the German advance. The Germans found plenty of wrecks, but few usable supplies. Fuel tanks were empty, engines blown, bridges gone. Every ruined tank on the roadside was a reminder. The Soviets would rather burn their own land than surrender it. The policy came at a devastating cost for soldiers, civilians, and industry alike, but it worked. When the tide finally turned, those same rivers that swallowed Soviet tanks now saw new ones crossing them in counterattack. Today, divers and historians still discover sunken T-34s and KV-1s resting silently in lakes and rivers across Eastern Europe. Some are pulled out nearly intact, a time capsule of desperation. Rust-coated but recognizable, they tell a story of sacrifice, of an army willing to destroy its own power to survive another day. Each tank is a relic of that grim logic. If the enemy can't use it, the enemy can't win. So, why did the Soviets sink their tanks? Because in the chaos of World War II, survival meant destruction. Because every submerged T-34, every self-sabotaged machine was a symbol of defiance. Because even as the Red Army retreated, it refused to arm its invader.